people hear the gospel... Oh. I'll turn this on now. Guess I didn't have it on the whole service. Sorry, Mike. When people hear the gospel or they first hear about Jesus, there's a number of different responses they can have. But one of the things that we can almost guarantee that in most cases there's going to be questions. And these aren't simple questions. They're actually quite big. Is there any real right and wrong? Is there any real heaven or hell? Why is there evil in the world? And what about the wars started by Christianity? Don't all religions lead to God? What happens to people who don't know Jesus? And the big one, is Jesus really God? We're in a second weekend in our series, How I Met Jesus, hearing people's stories like Mike's. And if you'd like to share your story, we'd love to hear how you met Jesus. And we're also looking at the Gospel of John, studying John's Gospel. There's 4 Gospel accounts in the New Testament. 3 of them were written earlier. And then much later, disciple John wrote his Gospel. But his is very different in that it's very relational. He spent a lot of time writing down the relationship component, the relationships that Jesus had, and the conversations Jesus had with people. And so we're unpacking that. And today we're going to look at, from John 1, we're going to look at the conversation that took place between Philip and Nathaniel when they first met Jesus. So turn in your Bible to John 1. By the way, there's lots of space, as you can tell, in the 9 a.m. service. So if you have any friends or anyone, maybe in the 11 o'clock, you should say, hey, the 9 o'clock, it is bumping. Like, you need to be at the 9 o'clock. So we're just looking out today and we're imagining, we're kind of realizing our 11 o'clock might be very, very full today. But that's great. We're glad that you took the bull by the horns and got up early and are here. Thank you so much for that. Lots of room. Spread the word. Okay? So John 1, you can grab a Bible in one of the seats in front of you, or the passage will appear on the screen. Here we go. Starting at verse 43. John 1:43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said to him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." All right, let's unpack this a little bit. And let's start with Jesus finding Philip. It says that Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He's decided to go to that area. And it says he found Philip. So he found Philip. So there's some questions there. Was he looking for Philip? Did he already know that he was going to call Philip to be a disciple, to be a follower? Well, considering that he saw Nathanael ahead of time, and Jesus is God, I think he knew a lot before he got to Galilee. And so he calls Philip to himself, but Philip's response is so awesome. Philip, he responds immediately, it seems. There's no real questions or contest on whether or not he is the Messiah and whether or not Philip wants to follow him. But not only does he respond immediately, but he responds evangelically. It's like Jesus calls him, says, follow me. And it's not like Philip just says, okay, let's go. Let's do this. What does he think of? He's like, wait a second. Okay, so I got this friend Nathaniel, and he has got to know about this. Immediately after, it seems, he leaves and he goes to find his friend Nathaniel. This is like the first evangelistic moment after Jesus starts calling people. It's amazing. Did Jesus know ahead of time, man, Philip's going to be an evangelist? And Philip's, I really kind of want Nathaniel too, so maybe I got to get Philip to get Nathaniel. I just wonder all these questions. What was Jesus thinking? What was his plan? In the other Gospels, so you know, many scholars believe that Nathaniel's name in the other Gospels, sometimes it's interchangeable with Bartholomew. Now, considering the first three Gospels were written before John, there's some thoughts on whether or not his first name was Bartholomew and changed his name to Nathaniel. Jesus often changed some names. So whether or not that took place. But Bartholomew's always mentioned with Philip, and Philip's mentioned with Nathaniel, so this is the belief. But so let's go into that. Philip then finds Nathaniel. This statement, this language of he went and found Nathaniel. He found him. He was looking for him. But unlike Jesus, he couldn't have known exactly where Nathaniel was. So he must have actually had to look for him, and maybe he knew where Nathaniel was earlier that morning, or he knew where his regular hangouts would be. There's obviously a relationship here. It's his buddy, it's his friend, and so he goes to find Nathaniel. And it's like, if I'm going to follow Jesus, if Jesus has given me an opportunity to live my life with him and for him, and I found the Messiah, oh man, Nathaniel needs in on this. What kind of love did Philip have for his brother here? His friend. He must have had a serious kinship with him that his first thought after meeting Jesus is, I have got to let Nathaniel in on this. We got to do this together. We got to take this adventure together. So Nathaniel is waiting. Philip explains to him, probably quite excited, and probably a sense of urgency, and it's like, look, everything written by Moses, all the prophets. Basically what he's saying is, the writings that they had, the Old Testament, man, dude, it's come true today. It is true. He's here. The Messiah is here. And these writings of Moses and the prophets, we immediately have a bit of a question. Well, what kind of writings are we talking about? Like, surely Philip didn't rhyme off all of these. There's a sense that these men were, obviously must have been steadfast in their faith in the Jewish law. There's an understanding they must have known these, and culturally they maybe went to temple and they heard some of these things read before. They knew they were waiting on the Messiah. And as he said this, there seems to be this understanding that Nathaniel would have known who he's talking about and would have known these scriptures. But for us, here 2,000 years later, what are some of these scriptures? I thought I would just take a moment, do a bit of a rabbit trail, and throw out some references. This is going to be really quick for the sake of time, but you can, with your phone, you can take pictures of the slides, or you can just drop me an email or a text, and I can send you all these references if you want to look at. But I want to look at a few to try to get a sense for us, if we can be back in the mind of Philip and Nathaniel and say, okay, what prophecies or what kind of Old Testament texts would have come to their mind? Okay? So let's go back in time a little bit. So the first thing you said, what's written in the law of Moses? Well, there's two references I'd like to give you. Genesis 49, 1-12, and Deuteronomy 18, 15-19. So, in Genesis 49, in verse 8, we read, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. In verse 10, it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. To him shall be the obedience of the peoples. This this is something that people of the Jewish faith, they would have believed the line of Judah, the tribe of Judah, that the Messiah is going to come from there. Deuteronomy 18, in verse 17, he says, and the Lord said, verse 18, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. Well, what about the prophets? Some of the prophetical writings. So we have 2 Samuel 7, verses 12 through 16. In verse 12 it says, I will raise up your offspring after you, and I will establish his kingdom. Verse 13, I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. 14, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And we can look to the book of Isaiah. There is loads in Isaiah that speak to the coming Messiah, speak to Christ. In Isaiah 9, this is the one where, common one we hear at Christmas, for unto us a child is born, a son is given, the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called. And these are some of the names that we get of the Messiah: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Verse 7, it says, of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David, which speaks to the Messiah's lineage, and over his kingdom, to establish it, to uphold it with justice and with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore. 2 chapters later in Isaiah, we read it in Isaiah, not 2 chapters, near the end of Isaiah in 52, we read in verse 13, it says, behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up. He shall be exalted. And then we see some prophecy in regards to the crucifixion. In 14, it says, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance. This speaks to what happened before the crucifixion. In 15, it says, kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. And then we get the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is also full of things in regards to Jesus. In Daniel 7, in verse 13, it says, behold, with the clouds of heaven there come one like the Son of Man. In 14, it says, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. 2 chapters later, Daniel writes this, decreed about your people, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet. And this, of course, speaking to Jesus coming to be the one that acts as to remove all sin, all transgression, making a way. And a last one, I'm just hopefully just giving you a sampling, but in Zechariah 12, verse 10, it says, and I will pour out on the house of David, again, Jesus' lineage, a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced, speaking of crucifixion, and they shall mourn for him, as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him, as one weeps over a firstborn. These are just a small sampling. The Old Testament is massive. What I read there in those 5 to 8 minutes, this is just a small sampling of things that would have been read in the temple. So understanding when Philip comes to Nathanael, these are some of the things, these are some of the verses that they would have had on their heart that would have come up. So the initial excitement for Nathanael would have been there. And just even now, if you're looking for a great resource, there's an organization called Jews for Jesus. And Jews for Jesus, their mandate, JewsForJesus.org is their website, their mandate is evangelical in that they realize that there are many Jews who rejected Jesus as the Messiah. And they're not going to make it to heaven, and that burdens them deeply. And so their mandate, Jews for Jesus, is their evangelical at their core to try to reach as many Jews that have rejected Jesus to try to convince them that, no, this is the Messiah. You missed him. And if you go on their website, you will find like verse after verse after verse, argument after argument, tons of documentation, lots and lots of stuff. So if understanding how the Old Testament points towards Jesus, if this interests you or excites you, go to their website, and they have online forums that you can ask questions. It's absolutely amazing. They do an amazing job. We need to pray for them for sure. So Nathaniel could have been in. Let's go back to our story here. So Philip gives this thing, Moses and the prophets, some of these things. But then there's a big pitfall. Because there's a comma there, and then Philip says, Jesus of Nazareth, Joseph's son. And this is where for Nathanael it was just like, wow. Really? Nazareth? You start with, this is the one that Moses and the prophets are talking about. This is the Messiah from Nazareth? Nazareth, Philip? Give me a break. Well, we have another question there. What's the deal with Nazareth? Why is Nazareth so bad? Well, there's a couple things. There's a prophetic one, which we'll do secondary. But in 2003, they found that there might be more to it than just the prophetic. In 2003, they did a massive archaeological dig in the site of Nazareth. And what they found is right around the time that this account would have taken place, they found an increased, like 100-fold amount of Roman military objects, writings, everything like that. So they started to look and look and look and look, and then they started to do some work in documentation from the Roman Empire, and they found that Nazareth at this time was actually the garrison. It was the outpost for the area of Galilee. So there's a prophetic reason what we're going to get to, but now let's just think about this for a moment. Let's think of Whitehorse. Now, in the 40s, during World War II, Japan wanted to take the West Coast. They started to take Alaska. They wanted to work up the Aleutian chain. You work through Alaska, the next place you hit is the Yukon. The Alaska Highway is built, and Whitehorse becomes a kind of big hub as far as military goes. Lots of American military stationed here. Now the difference for our city in the 40s is that we were allies. Canada and the United States were allies in World War II, so we, of course, were more than happy to allow a military base or a massive component and lots of American military to live here, work here, train here. It helped us. But imagine if it was different. Because in this time, here's the deal. Rome took Jerusalem, it took Israel by force. There was no sort of ally against a common enemy. They were the enemy, and they took over. So that's bad enough. But imagine you're a citizen, you're living in Nazareth. Maybe it's like living in Whitehorse. All of a sudden, the military comes in, and they like your town so much that in the territory of the Yukon, they like Whitehorse so much that, you know what? This is going to be the hub. We're going to send thousands of soldiers to live among you, work among you, everything. There will be an increase in your town. You were born in this town. Maybe you grew up in this town. All of a sudden, everything changes when the Roman Empire comes in. You're a blacksmith. Guess what you're doing? You're probably working a lot for the Roman Empire. That's a hassle when you've been taken by force and you're not an ally. So in 2003, they found out that this might have been a very, very practical reason why anyone from Nazareth either was forced to work with the Roman military or they were seen as maybe buddy-buddy with the Romans. That's a practical reason, but the prophetic is even more important. In Micah 5:2, there's a well-known prophecy that Nathaniel Philip would have known. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah. From you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient of days. This is a big reason. The Messiah is supposed to come from Bethlehem, not Nazareth. And this is what's so amazing about Jesus. Sometimes he doesn't like to reveal everything. Like he could have said to Philip, hey, Nathaniel's going to be a little bit skeptical. Here's a copy of my birth certificate just in case he asks about the whole Bethlehem thing. It's not like Jesus went around advertising that he was born in Bethlehem. There was a census, born in Bethlehem, back to Nazareth. He grew up in Nazareth, carpenter's son, Joseph's son. Nathaniel's like, Nazareth? No way. Nazareth is the worst place to be from. And definitely, he's not from Bethlehem, so he can't be the Messiah. Why wouldn't Jesus just add that component? Did Philip know that? Maybe it didn't matter to Philip, because he just responded immediately. So Nathaniel's still skeptical. But Jesus still finds Nathaniel. As Philip says, come and see, drags Nathaniel to him, and Nathaniel's on his way, and Jesus sees him come and says, you're an Israelite, and with no deceit, basically giving Nathaniel a compliment, saying this is a very truthful guy. This guy is obviously from Jesus' point of view, Nathaniel was an upstanding guy. And he was like, wait a second, you don't know me? How do you know me? And we can hear the skepticism. Because if someone gives you a compliment and says, oh man, here's a true Israelite, there's no deceit, you're going to be like, wow, I like this guy. Nathaniel doesn't respond like that. Nathaniel doesn't say, oh, I'm all in. There's a sense there's still skepticism. How do you know me? Well, you just gave me a compliment, but how do you know me? And Jesus says, I saw you before Philip even got to you. I called Philip and Philip called you, but I saw you even before that. See, for Nathaniel as a skeptic, it's amazing. We see a little bit of the heart. It's not about the facts for him. It's when Jesus says, I saw you. I knew you. Core needs to human existence is to be known and to be needed. And in that moment, Nathaniel was known by Jesus. Known by Jesus when he was sitting under a fig tree before Philip even found him. He was known by Jesus. And obviously he's going to take Nathaniel with him to be a follower and to serve the kingdom, so he's needed. So there's facts and there's prophecy and there's all this stuff and there's even compliments that Jesus is giving Nathaniel, but you know what? That doesn't matter. But he realizes, you saw me? You know me? You are the Son of God. And this is probably the first time, scholars believe this is the first time that someone verbally responded to Jesus calling him the Son of God. And stating, you are the Son of God. Claiming his deity. You are the King of Israel. So he calls Son of God, King of Israel. Basically, this in Nathaniel's words, he's like fulfilling Old Testament prophecy just in his words, claiming it, putting it out there. I can't imagine Jesus when he hears that. And I don't know, like Jesus must have known that he was going to say that, but yet in Jesus' response, he's so pleased and there's a faith about it. He's like, because I said I saw you under a fig tree, you believe? Nathaniel, that's nothing. I got a lot more tricks up my sleeve. Like, there is stuff to come, Philip and Nathaniel, that is going to blow your mind. Just because I said I saw you under a fig tree, that's why you believe greater things. Greater things. You come on this journey with me, and over the next 3 years, you will see miracles. You will see the most amazing things. And yet you're all in, and you've actually claimed my deity audibly because I saw you under a fig tree. The skeptic, so many times the skeptic becomes the one that is all in. And we see this even in modern day theology. We saw this with Ravi Zacharias. The skeptic gets transformed by Jesus, and now one of the greatest apologists that we know. Lee Strobel, the movie Case for Christ came out. He was the biggest skeptic, and yet Lord takes over his life. Jesus transforms him. Now he travels all over, and it just gives leading millions of people to Jesus through his writings and through his talks, showing them the evidence of Jesus. When Jesus takes hold of a skeptic, look out. Because it's going to be big. And they're going to be claiming Jesus' deity everywhere they go. So, for us, reaching skeptics, do we have the answers? Do we have the answers we need? We have a sister church in Vancouver called Village Church. And the lead teaching pastor there, his name is Mark Clark, and he's done a preaching series called The Problem of God, where he takes the major big questions that people are asking in the new millennium about God and about Christianity. And then he published a book, The Problem of God, answering a skeptic's challenges to Christianity. And it's an amazing book. If you don't feel that you have the answers, if someone were to question things and you don't have the answers, grab this book. It's a great way to get some answers. A great way to get some answers. Because people are going to ask questions. But as we move to communion, the elders can come forward. How much do our friends mean to us? Let's look at Philip for a moment. Philip's in the presence of Jesus, and yet he leaves. He leaves to go find his friend. How much did he love his friend? How much do our friends and family mean to us? Are we willing to leave the safety and security of Christianity to reach the lost? Are we willing to hang out with other people, to serve other people, to spend time with other people? Or we kind of like our Jesus stuff so much that we kind of just want to stick to Christian stuff? Because in order to reach the lost, we actually have to spend time with them. And most of us have friends and maybe even family members that know Jesus, but are we willing to go there? Go there relationally, in time, but also in the conversation. Kind of be like Philip in a way. Philip went to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel did have a theistic faith. He believed in Yahweh, but he wasn't willing to really see that the Messiah could have been from Nazareth. He wasn't into that part. But Nathaniel thought he was fine. And so many times, there's many people in our culture today that might have a theistic faith. Maybe they're Muslim and they believe in Allah, and they think that's enough. Or they are Jewish and they believe in Yahweh and one part of the Godhead. But God, when we say God, we believe the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit equally. And we say God, but when we say God, we need to know, and mentally, intentionally, relationally, we need to understand it's all three. And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is the part of the Godhead in which we, humanity, sinful humanity, access the Godhead. But when we say God, it slips into us in our relationships because we'll let it float out there. And a lot of times, whether it be Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or Islam or Judaism or a lot of these theistic faiths, I'll speak to people and be like, wow, they believe in God, so they'll make it. Are you sure they'll make it? Are you sure? Now, I do know that in all those faith groups, I have heard numerous accounts where, despite the false teaching, despite the false doctrine, Jesus still transforms them because they start reading the Bible and all of a sudden they find the Messiah, despite that. But for us that have those friends, people say, well, they're good people, I get told. They are really good people. And I'm just like, if they're so good, wouldn't you want to spend eternity with them? Like, the good people that I know, I don't just want to spend time with them for a couple years and then have them shipped off. But there's a conversation there around Jesus that's so difficult. And Philip had to have it. Nathaniel probably thought Philip was crazy, but it was enough. You need to come and see this Jesus. And he had the benefit to show him in bodily form. We don't. It's difficult, but it doesn't mean the power is not the same. But for us, we also need to ask ourselves, before we go to this table, do we believe it? Sometimes I wonder if in evangelical churches, if many people have just existed in evangelical churches and maybe they've missed it. Maybe they've just thought, well, yeah, I believe in God and I go to a godly church and that's... But But do you really believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life? Jesus said it's a narrow road. It's not this big, wide, gray room where you might be good enough and you kind of believe in God, so in the end it'll work out. Jesus will be like, oh, okay, good enough, come on in. Jesus actually is very absolute. Very, very, seemingly in Scripture, if we read his words, he's seemingly very black and white. There's not really a lot of gray, which I think is why sometimes in Christianity we run into so many problems. Because we're faced with the fact that we follow someone that seems so black and white, and yet today in our culture in Canada, that the gray is so celebrated, and it becomes difficult for us because we're called to serve people and love people in the gray, and yet we're the people that have the black and white. And how do we do that? Well, I think we still need to speak in love. I still think we need to serve in love, but it comes down to us first. Do we really believe that Jesus is the only way? And so before we take this cup and this bread, which is the celebration of his sacrifice, this is a celebration of that moment where God came down and a system that humanity had broken, God sent his one and only Son to repair that system that we had mucked up. And this here, when we take this bread representing his body, when we take this cup representing his blood, this is what we're celebrating. We are saying that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And once again, I want to pause, Lord, and I want to thank you so much for sending your Son. And I just want to give it all back to you. And it's been maybe a month since I did this. Maybe it's been like 6 months since I did this. But I'm taking this moment now and I'm realizing back to it, yes, Jesus is the only way. And without him, I'd be nothing. Without him, I would still be lost. Without him, I would still be sinful. Without him, I would still be spending eternity in hell in separation. But because you sent your Son, though you loved him, because you sent your Son, and because of that death and sacrifice and that resurrection, I don't have to live like that. I live free. And so, as we pass out this bread and cup, let's just take a moment and pause and think about that, and maybe the recommitment to say, I am taking the narrow path. In a world of gray, in a big wide spectrum where everyone's trying to tell me that there's multiple ways to get there, I'm going to believe Jesus' words. And I'm going to believe that he is the only way, the only truth, and the only life. And I'm going to stand firm on it. And that's what we can do every time we have communion. Nick, would you be praying for the bread? Is that okay?
God our Father, we come before you today and thank you again for the Lord Jesus Christ. Father, your word says that his visage was marred beyond recognition. Father, going to the cross was a very physical thing. But we thank you, Father, that he was willing to sacrifice his body and take the penalty of sin upon himself